January 23rd, 1947, 4:17 a.m. A meteorologist at Kew Observatory in southwest London records the first snowfall. Light flurries, nothing unusual for a British winter. He notes it in the log, goes back to his tea. He has no idea what's coming. None of them do. In the next 55 days, snow will fall somewhere in Britain every single day. Not most days, every day. 750,000 railway wagons will vanish under drifts reaching 7 metres high. 300 main roads will simply cease to exist, and 100,000 men will fight the snow with shovels, their bare hands, and eventually experimental jet engines designed for fighter aircraft. This is the story of Britain's darkest winter. Britain in January 1947 was already broken. 2 years after victory in Europe, the country was still rationing bread, still rebuilding bombed cities, still counting the cost of 6 years of total war. Coal production had collapsed. Power cuts were routine. The economy was on its knees. Then the temperature dropped. On January 21st, a massive anticyclone settled over Scandinavia. It didn't move. For 8 weeks it sat there like a lid on a freezer, pulling Arctic air down across the British Isles. By January 23rd, the snow had begun. It started in the north, the Scottish Highlands first, then the Pennines. By the 24th, it had reached London. By the 25th, snow was falling from Cornwall to the Shetlands, and it didn't stop. Day after day, storm after storm rolled in from the east. February came. The snow continued. March arrived. Still snowing. Meteorologists had never seen anything like it. There was no precedent in British records. The drifts came fast. In open country, the wind shaped snow into walls that buried hedgerows, swallowed livestock, erased entire villages from view. In the Yorkshire dales, drifts reached 7 metres. A double-decker bus could disappear in them. Several did. On February 4th, the temperature at Bromere in the Scottish Highlands hit minus 21 degrees Celsius, the coldest reading ever recorded in Britain. It stayed below freezing for 47 consecutive days. The railways died first. Britain's entire transport network depended on rail. 20,000 miles of track, 19,000 locomotives, a system built over a century, now grinding to a halt under the weight of snow. By the end of January, 750,000 railway wagons sat motionless. Some were buried so deep that railway workers couldn't even find them. The drifts weren't just on the tracks. They covered the wagons themselves, turned entire freight yards into smooth white plains with locomotive funnels poking through like shipwrecks. The coal crisis became catastrophic. Britain ran on coal. Every home, every factory, every power station. The coal came from mines in Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire, Durham. It moved by rail. Now it didn't move at all. Stockpiles at power stations dropped to emergency levels. On February 7th, the government ordered power cuts across the entire country. 5 hours per day. No exceptions. Factories shut down. 2 million people lost their jobs temporarily. In London, the underground went dark. Streetlights stayed off. Britain, victorious in the greatest war in history, couldn't keep the lights on. The government declared a national emergency. Prime Minister Clement Attlee went on the BBC. His message was simple: clear the railways, whatever it takes. The Minister of Transport, Alfred Barnes, knew what it would take. Men. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. He didn't have them. The British Army was stretched across a global empire. Demobilisation was still ongoing. But there were resources, unusual resources. 100,000 men were deployed to clear the railways. British soldiers, yes, but also Polish soldiers who had stayed in Britain after the war, unwilling or unable to return to Soviet-occupied Poland, and German prisoners of war. 25,000 of them, still held in camps across Britain. The optics were extraordinary. German POWs 2 years after the war, working alongside their former enemies to save British infrastructure. Some Germans volunteered, others were ordered. All of them were given the same tools: shovels, pickaxes, their hands. The clearing operations began in early February. The strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Start at the main junctions. Work outward. Dig trenches through the drifts until you hit rail. Repeat for 20,000 miles. In some sections, the drifts were so deep that men dug down 3 meters before finding track. The snow wasn't fresh and light. Weeks of freeze-thaw cycles had turned it to ice, compressed, solid, heavy. Every shovelful weighed 15 kilograms. The men worked in shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, in temperatures that regularly dropped to -15. There are photographs from this period. Black and white images of men standing in snow trenches so deep only their heads are visible. The trenches are perfectly straight, ruler straight, following the rail lines beneath. In some photos, you can see steam locomotives in the distance, waiting for the path to be cleared. In others, you see nothing but white. Horizon to horizon, white. The work destroyed men. Frostbite was common. Exhaustion was universal. Several men died. Heart attacks, hypothermia. One German POW, Hans Richter, 23 years old, was clearing track near Sheffield when the trench walls collapsed. The snow buried him in seconds. They dug him out, too late. He was buried in a British cemetery, standard military honours. The war was over, but the dying continued. By mid-February, the clearing crews had freed about 20% of the trapped wagons. It wasn't enough. The coal crisis was deepening. Power cuts extended to 6 hours per day. Factories that hadn't closed were now closing. The government was desperate. Conventional methods weren't working fast enough. Someone suggested flamethrowers. The logic seemed sound. Snow is frozen water. Fire melts ice. Flamethrowers produce fire. The British Army had plenty of flamethrowers left over from the war. Wasp flamethrowers, mounted on universal carriers, portable flamethrower units, all designed to incinerate German bunkers, now repurposed to fight snow. The trials began on February 18th near York, a section of track buried under 4 meters of drift. 6 flamethrower teams. The order was given. Flames erupted. It worked. For about 90 seconds, the ice melted. Water ran across the tracks. Then the flames reached the wooden sleepers beneath the rails. British rail sleepers were treated with creosote, a coal tar derivative. Highly flammable. The sleepers caught fire immediately, not just smouldering, burning. The steel rails, heated unevenly, began to warp. In 7 minutes, the flamethrower teams destroyed 200 meters of functional railway. The trial was abandoned. The cost of the damage exceeded the entire snow-clearing budget. The failure of the flamethrowers forced a radical rethink. The problem wasn't just melting the ice. It was melting it without destroying everything underneath. What was needed was intense, focused heat that could be directed precisely. Someone at the Ministry of Supply had an idea. Gas turbine engines, jet engines. The same technology that powered Britain's new Gloucester Meteor fighters. A turbine engine produces an exhaust jet at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. Directed at ice, it would melt it instantly. Directed at wooden sleepers, it would... Well, that was the question. The turbine units were experimental. Rolls-Royce had been developing portable gas turbine generators for military use. Small, mobile, capable of producing enormous heat. They'd never been tested for snow clearing. There were only 3 prototype units in existence. The Ministry of Supply requisitioned all 3. On February 23rd, they arrived at a test site near Leeds. The conditions were perfect. 7-meter drifts, buried track, frozen solid. The turbines were positioned, ignited. The roar was tremendous. Then the ice began to move. The jet exhaust didn't just melt the ice, it vaporized it, turned it directly from solid to steam. The crews aimed the turbines at the base of the drifts, cutting horizontal tunnels through the ice wall. The tunnels grew at a rate of 3 meters per minute, 10 times faster than manual digging, 20 times faster. The heat was so intense that men operating the turbines worked in 3-minute rotations. Any longer and the radiant heat became unbearable. But there was a problem. The same problem as the flamethrowers, the sleepers. The turbine exhaust was hot enough to ignite them. The solution came from a railway engineer named Thomas Kemp, 47 years old, 30 years with the London and North Eastern Railway. Kemp proposed a simple modification. Dig a narrow trench alongside the track first, manually, just deep enough to expose the rails but not the sleepers. Then use the turbine to clear the bulk of the drift above and beside the track, keeping the jet exhaust above the sleeper level. It added time, but it worked. The 3 turbine units were deployed to critical junctions: York, Doncaster, Peterborough. Where they worked, progress accelerated dramatically. Sections that would have taken 200 men 5 days to clear were finished in 8 hours. But 3 turbines couldn't clear a national rail network. The manual work continued. The shovels, the pickaxes, the frozen hands. March arrived. The snow fell. Every single day. The streak had reached 37 days, then 40, then 45. The meteorologists were baffled. The anticyclone over Scandinavia refused to move. It just sat there, a high-pressure dome pulling Arctic air south. Britain was locked in a freezer with no key. The human cost mounted. Not just the clearing crews, everyone. Elderly people froze to death in unheated homes. Coal deliveries were so disrupted that even those with money couldn't buy fuel. Hospitals ran low on supplies. Food distribution collapsed in rural areas. In some villages, cut off by impassable roads and buried railways, people survived on stockpiled potatoes and whatever livestock they could butcher. The winter of 1947 killed thousands. The exact number was never calculated. Deaths from cold, from starvation, from accidents related to the conditions. The war had ended, the dying had not. On March 12th, something changed. The wind shifted, just slightly. From northeast to east, then southeast. The anticyclone was weakening. On March 15th, the temperature at Braemar rose above freezing for the first time in 47 days. On March 16th, rain fell in London. Actual rain. Not freezing rain, liquid water. On March 17th, 1947, no snow fell anywhere in Britain. For the first time in 55 days, the streak was over. The thaw brought its own disasters. 7 metres of snow doesn't just disappear, it melts. The water has to go somewhere. Britain's rivers, already swollen, overflowed. The Thames flooded. The Severn flooded. The Trent, the Ouse, the Aire, all flooding. Towns that had survived the snow were now underwater. The floods lasted 3 weeks. Some areas were evacuated twice. Once for snow, once for floods. 1947 was relentless. The final accounting took months. 750,000 railway wagons had been trapped. All were eventually recovered. 4,000 locomotives had been buried, all operational again by June. 300 main roads had been impassable, all cleared by late March. The railway clearing operation employed at its peak 120,000 men. British troops, Polish troops, German POWs, civilian volunteers. They moved an estimated 50 million cubic metres of snow, by hand, with shovels, and 3 experimental jet engines. The economic impact was catastrophic. Industrial production fell 25%. 2 million workers were idle for weeks. The coal crisis crippled power generation for the entire spring. Britain, already struggling with post-war recovery, was set back years. Some economists argue that the winter of 1947 contributed directly to the devaluation of the pound in 1949. The costs were that severe. The turbine technology, however, had a legacy. Rolls-Royce refined the portable gas turbine design. By 1950, improved versions were standard equipment for railway maintenance across northern Britain. Not for snow clearing specifically, but for rapid ice removal, track maintenance, emergency operations. The principles learned in February 1947, cutting tunnels through ice, directing heat precisely, became doctrine. The Flamethrower trials were never mentioned officially. Those records were quietly buried. The winter itself entered British collective memory as a benchmark, a standard of severity against which all future winters would be measured. When snow falls in Britain now, meteorologists and journalists still reference 1947. Nothing since has come close. The Big Freeze of 1963 was colder. The winter of 2010 saw more widespread disruption, but no winter since 1947 has delivered snow every single day for 55 consecutive days. There's a memorial now in York, a small plaque on the wall of the National Railway Museum. It lists the dates, January 23rd to March 17th, 1947. Beneath the dates, a single line. In memory of all who worked to keep Britain moving, no names, no specific units, just the dates and the tribute. The men who dug those trenches, who froze and suffered and died, most of them are gone now, but the railways they saved are still running. January 23rd, 1947. The snow began. Light flurries at first, nothing unusual. 55 days later it stopped. In between, Britain fought the hardest winter in its recorded history with shovels, determination, and 3 experimental jet engines. They won, barely, and they never forgot.